Welcome to the Gravel Gospel. I'm Bionic Leg. Okay, so let's dive into one of the many questions that I've heard before. That people have about early Genesis. So, how do we go from Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, to a population so massive and so jacked up that God's got to hit the factory reset button? Short answer: multiplication and time. So, you got to figure by the time that we get to uh, Noah. Okay. There's been a lot of people, a lot of multiplication. You know, they're taking what God said when He said, "Be fruitful and multiply," taking it literally. So there's your multiplication piece, and then your time piece. So I want to point something out. If you're reading Scripture through a 21st century lens, it's not going to pass the logic test. Okay, as far as how long people lived, right? But I want to challenge that perspective. I want to push back a little bit. If you consider the diet, where they were at, location, general just way of life, you don't have technology. You don't have um, pick a thing that would shorten lifespan. Why can't that be possible? It's not uncommon here in 2025 to read an article or hear some story about somebody living 102, you know, uh, be it Okinawa where they've got particular diets or here in the States. That's not uncommon. You hear a story about somebody that's uh, 95. They're like, "How did you live so long?" And they tell some crazy story. So I don't think it's too far fetched to think that the lifespan could be bonkers like that. So keeping that in mind. All right. So here we go. Keeping that idea in mind, after Cain and Abel, Eve has a third son. At this point, Adam's already 130 years old. Okay, he ends up dying at 930, which is bonkers. But the dude's not even the record holder. That title, it goes to Methuselah. So Noah, who we're going to talk about, his grandfather. Methuselah died at 969 when he finally kicks it. Okay, so he's got the oldest recorded. Now something I want to mention though, and through Genesis, it does talk about some bonkers years that people had lived. But somebody that I want to point out is Enoch. So Enoch, he was 365. Still insane, but this is where it's interesting. So the Bible doesn't say, and he died. So like Methuselah. Methuselah was 969 years old, and then he died. Enoch, it doesn't say that. It just says, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. There's another translation that says it, and then one day he was simply gone. God took him. So it's interesting that it doesn't take the time to point out, or I don't want to say that it doesn't take the time, but it doesn't specifically say, and Enoch died. It's just, and he was gone. I think it's important to note Enoch because chapter 5, it's taken the time to list each person, how old they were when they died, all the way up to Noah, but then Enoch, it makes an exception. It's important because you see much later, like 3,000 years past that Enoch gets referenced again. So this is what I was saying about those seeds being planted. So you get a little seed, it gets planted, talking about Enoch, and then you get a payoff all the way into the New Testament. So that's kind of neat. All right. So we've talked about our weird lifespans. So let's go to Noah. So from Adam to Noah, there's nine generations and 1,100 years between the two of them. Okay, so back in the beginning, I was saying massive population, time. There you go, 1,100 years. Okay, chapter 6, it goes on and it says, the sons of God noticed that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they looked them over and pointed out wives for themselves. Here's what's interesting. Pay attention to the delineation of the phrasing. It says sons of God, phrase, and man. So what this is talking about, and depending on the translation you look at, it's referencing the Nephilim. The Nephilim were their beings offered. A lot of times they're referenced as half angel, half human. Okay, and then two verses later, the same chapter, it actually calls them giants, like giant, like Goliath, giant. Okay, so then when you think about that, when David fought Goliath, and I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but when David fought Goliath, that's a whole new perspective on what was going down. Just stinking bonkers. But anyways, I digress. So we sorted out the Nephilim. We talked about the. Let's talk about the lifespan changes. Okay, so in verse 3, God acknowledges that God says humanity's just mortal in flesh. They're not of spirit. They're flesh. So he says, and depending on the translation you read, he says, I'm not going to continue to breathe life into them. So here is where he factory sets the shelf life of humanity, and he sets it to 120 years. Okay. Now you do see a little bit later, when we're talking about Noah, we're talking about Abram, their lifespans, but this is kind of where that he it's not necessarily that he shortens the lifespan, but he sets it to 120 years. Okay. All right. A lot of time gets passed. All right. So massive population comes massive corruption. Situation gets not okay. To the extent that God said, and this is wild, I am sorry that I have made them. That's insane. But in the middle of all that darkness, there's one light, Noah. The scripture calls Noah righteous and blameless in his generation. The quote, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Noah had a relationship with God. Okay. So one day, God said, well, one day Noah's spending time with God. All right. They're talking, they're having conversation. Noah's in worship. And all of a sudden, God goes, I'm going to make an end of all flesh. The earth is full of violence through them. And I think it would be an absolutely hilarious to be a fly on that wall for the conversation. Because they're just sitting there talking, you know. Noah's telling about the family. Noah's in worship. God's mentoring Noah. And then all of a sudden he goes, Noah, I'm going to hit the reset button on Earth. I'm going to start over. And there's just a few seconds for the wheels to catch. And then Noah's going, all right, I got 2 questions. First question, what's a reset button? Second question, what do you mean start over? Because I mean, this is mind blowing. But God being gracious, being all knowing what's gonna happen, he gave Noah a plan. Because remember, Noah walked with God. Remember that. So God's not just gonna say, "Hey, I'm gonna wipe it and then figure it out for yourself." No, that's not what he does. He tells him exactly what he needs him to do. He said, God told him, he said, make you a ship from gopher wood, give it rooms, coat it. I need you to coat it from the inside and out, coat it with pitch. It's going to be huge. It's going to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. So he gave him the dimensions. He said, give it a roof. I want you to put a window 18 inches from the top, put the door on the side, and then it needs to have 3 decks. Okay. Then he goes, because Noah's probably sitting here going, okay, why? So he just told me he's going to destroy the earth. He's going to destroy all living things. Then he's telling me to make a boat. I'm on land. What? God answers that. He says, I'm going to bring a flood on the earth that's going to smoke everything alive under heaven. So then Noah's going, wait, what's rain? Because think about it. When we talked about Genesis, the concept of rain didn't exist because it talked about the firmament. So it's theorized that how Earth was at the time, you just had this, like, it was in a biodome, so there was constant mist. So that concept didn't exist yet. So Noah's probably still going, okay, God, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm going to do what you tell me. So God says, I'm going to bring a flood on the earth that's going to smoke everything alive under heaven. My paraphrase. But God says, I'm going to establish my covenant with, which is dope. That's so stinking cool when God tells his people throughout scripture, hey, I'm going to do this thing, but I got you. Establish a covenant with you. And you'll see another covenant later. You see it a couple times. It's so stinking cool. So God tells him, he says, I want you, your wife, your son's families on the boat. And I'm going to give you a list. So here's the cargo list. So you got your people, no, your cargo. God tells him, he says, I need 7 pairs of all clean animals and 7 pairs of unclean animals. Then I want you to get 7 pairs of birds. It says birds of the heavens. So he tells him, grab this, and then, where's my line? And then a pair of all the animals of the land. Okay, the whole intent so that humanity and all the animals of the air can survive. They can flourish. So I want to pause there just for a second, because here he's talking about all the land animals. Okay, because flood, ocean, sea creatures. That wasn't. It didn't matter. We're talking about land. Okay, so I do hear this a lot. It's like, all right, well, how did he get all the animals on the boat? Because if we go back to 21st century thought process, like that logically, it doesn't make sense. Okay, well, I think it's 2 parts. So first thing, let's go. What's our time frame? Roughly 1100 years after creation. Okay, I'll use the dog as an example. How many breeds do we got right now? We're a little over 300. Just thinking basic concept, domestic and wild. Okay, considering our time frame, your gene pool is going to be a lot smaller. The Canis gene pool is going to be a lot smaller. So instead of 300 variation of Canis, you've got just a handful. So I think that's the first part. Second part, if you jump ahead and you go to chapter 9, after the flood, God instills a natural fear of humanity on the animal kingdom. Okay, so that's after the flood. So before, I think it's safe to say, without the fear of humanity in the way, it could be something as simple as Noah and the family just going, "Hey, come here," and then I think it's funny. But either way, so Noah and the family, they get on the SS Reset. That's what I'm gonna call the boat, the SS Reset. Okay, and I think it's funny. So they get on the boat. 7 days later, God hits the wash cycle on Earth. Ka-kunk. Okay, rain starts to come down and waters come up. So that's what I was talking about, how Earth was for that time. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So just like God called it, it rained consistently 40 days and 40 nights. So the water is not just coming down, because that firmament, God just goes, boink, and then rain comes down, but it also comes up. So Genesis 7 and 11 says, the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. So you figure jetties in the ocean. Boom. So levels rising, lakes rising, water coming down, a lot of water movement. Oh, and it's nuts because it says in verse 20, waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. So cubit, roughly a foot and a half. So it's about 22 feet over the highest peaks. That's a lot of water. So after God sees the wash cycle's done, he's like, okay, everything's smoked. Then he flips the setting to dry. So Genesis 8, 1 through 3 says that God made a wind blow over the earth and the waters subsided. So the fountains of the deep were closed, rain gets restrained, the waters continually recede. It took from it raining to start them on the boat. It takes 150 days for the water to go down just far enough for the SS Reset to hit landfall on the mountain system of Ararat. But they just like hit the top of the mountain and they just kind of got stuck. So 150 days for that water to come down. So they hit landfall. Noah's got to wait an additional 40 days before he can even crack the window. That's gnarly. That was when I was reading this, I'm going, okay. They got one window, one door. They're in the boat with all these animals. That had to be nasty. The smell factor. It's so gross. Anyways, I don't want to get too off the track. So waits an additional 40 days before he opens a window. So after the 40 days, Noah lets out a raven. Hey, go find dry land. So raven takes out, and then it comes back. So it doesn't really say if the raven found anything. I'm like, all right, cool. So then, after the raven comes back, Noah sends out a dove. We're going to call her Betty. I just wanted to give her an arbitrary. Unfortunately, Betty can't find anything anywhere to land, so Noah's got to wait another 7 days. So waits the other 7 days. Betty goes back out. This time she doesn't come back for evening until the evening. So she's been out for a minute. And sure enough, our bestest girl, she gets herself freshly plucked olive leaf. Like, that's stinking cool. All right, so old girl, she was busy. And I could just be completely missing it, but I wonder if this is where we get the phrase extending an olive branch, being that the olive branch is a signal of peace. But I digress. So you'd think that, okay, cool, Betty finds the olive branch and then time to land. Nope. They gotta wait another 7 days. So after this next 7 days, Noah gets Betty, sends her back out. Okay, so this time, she doesn't come back. I'm thinking it's one of two things. Either A, Betty's out flying, she's flying close to the water, and she just gets smoked by a fish. Because, like I said, it's just land creatures and birds. I thought it was kind of a funny concept, or it's possibly Betty finds dry land and she's thinking, this guy keeps sending me out. I found land. I ain't going back. That's gross. Safe to say, Betty finds land. Cool. So Betty doesn't come back. He sees it. He's like, all right, cool. We're good. So he removes the covering from the ark, and sure enough, ground's dry. But Noah, having listening to God, his relationship with God, he's going to wait for God to tell him, hey, all right, now you can leave the boat. God is a man of his word, their relationship, so it tracks. Eventually, God tells him, okay, cool, you can leave the boat. Sweet. First thing Noah does when he gets off the SS reset, first thing he does, builds an altar. It says that he offered some of every clean animal and every clean bird as an offering to God. This is pure gratitude. And they've been on the boat just a little over a year. When you add up all the timelines, they've been on that stinking boat for over a year. God told Noah that he's going to just smoke everything. He's start over. But he chose Noah. So as gratitude, Noah, first thing he does, he builds that altar, makes those sacrifices out of gratitude and thankfulness for God's protection. That despite his decision to pressure wash the earth, he chose Noah. Chapter 8 says, "And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man. The intentions of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature just as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." That's cool. So, God blesses Noah and his sons, and he tells him, here it is again, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Now, remember the line, and fill the earth. That's going to come into play the next video. Okay, so keep that in your brain. So he continues. He says, God says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I give you everything except for meat with its lifeblood in it. Don't eat that. So basically he's saying, don't eat blood. Yucky. And he just speaks to it later. But then God institutes, this is the first time we see a law against murder. Okay. It says, whoever sheds human blood, by humans let his blood be shed. Because God made humans in his image, reflecting God's very nature. So I want to put a slight pause in there. I know some people get certain things twisted. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but that will come into play later. Anyways, God takes it a step even further. He establishes a covenant, not just with Noah, but every living creature on earth. He said, never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. See, I have set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. So that's why anytime after it rains, you see the rainbow. That's what it is. We're getting to see a visual representation of God's covenant with us, which is so stinking cool. But anyways, all right. So Noah does the altar. They get off the ark. They've been on the ark for a little bit over a year. God does this covenant. The flood ventures with the SS reset. They're over. Noah's got to have something to do. What's he do? He gets into farming, plants a vineyard, and he figures out how to make wine, which makes sense. And he's good at it. Fortunately, there's one point he has a little too much, and dude passes out naked in his tent. Which that by itself, he's in his room. Okay, I don't want to get twisted on that. This is where it matters. For some reason, we have no idea why. So remember, Noah's got 3 sons: Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Okay, Ham, however you want to say it, he's the father of Canaan, as in Canaanites. Remember this. So they're on the boat. Ham, for some bizarre reason, ends up in Noah's tent, and he sees his dad naked. That's not the issue. Here's the issue. Instead of respectfully covering his dad, he thinks it's a good idea to go and tell his 2 brothers, Shem and Japheth. Now, we don't know exactly what he said or how he said it, but it's pretty safe to say he wasn't being respectful. Because the very next thing Shem and Japheth do, they grab a garment, they put it between them at shoulder height, and they go in backwards to cover their dad. And they made sure that they couldn't see, so it was pretty impressive they did it. And they wanted to cover him up out of respect. So that's just interesting. Now, Noah wakes up, he figures out what Ham did, and he goes for the throat. Noah cursed Ham. He said, "Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall be to his brothers." So basically, as if to say, Ham, the father of Canaan, you're going to be a servant of servants. Okay, then. He continues, and then he blesses Shem and Japheth. He said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." So, in the next couple videos, you'll start to see, I was telling you, planting those seeds, you'll start to see that pay off. So, after the flood, Noah lives for another 350 years. When he died, he was 950. So, our next time we will get into Tower of Babel, and then after Tower, then we're going to get into Abram. That long road. That was dope. So, this is Bionic Leg. Appreciate your time. Welcome to the Gravel Gospel.